All right, it looks like we're live. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be watching this and whenever. We'll just do brief introductions. Ladies first, Erin.
Hi, my name is Erin Prest. I am a partner at McCarter English, a law firm in DC, but I am formerly of the FBI, where I was the Privacy and Civil Liberties Officer as well as Deputy General Counsel.
Thank you. Shawn Devroude here. I'm retired senior executive with the FBI, 22 years, most notably for this audience, the last 5 years in cyber operations, running FBI's cyber clandestine operations against nation-state actors, running covert offsites for CNO, CNE against those state actors, and then the last couple of years as a Deputy Assistant Director over cyber operations.
And my name's Chris Pogue. I am the Director of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at CyberCX. Prior to that, I was a United States Army Warrant Officer in the Criminal Investigation Division, investigating crimes as part of the Global War on Terror. Subsequent to that, I worked at IBM Global Services for 11 years, TrustWave Spider Labs for 6 years, and I was a United States Secret Service contract investigator and instructor. And I currently serve also as a professor at Oklahoma State University, where I teach international business and computer forensics. So I guess for us to start off our discussion, just what are some takeaways from this morning? Why don't we start again, ladies first, in the middle. Erin, what did you take from our chat this morning?
Sure. So I think we are in a place where the attacks are ever present. And so there's nothing anyone can do to kind of completely foolproof their system. And so it's a matter of making sure you're prepared for when a breach, when an attack happens. So from my perspective, it's about knowing your data, knowing where it is, what you have, how it's protected, and making sure you're taking those steps ahead of time, and knowing who to call when something happens. I think I'll pause there because that's a good place for Shawn to pick up.
Sure. I think another big takeaway from this morning, and I've got a lot of questions in the hallway after this, is for the audience and for the cyber security practitioners to understand when a breach happens, how do they interact with the federal agencies? Each agency has a different function. So one of the key things that we went through this morning is let's kind of go through the agencies and what their roles are. When you're talking about the SEC, right, and the Form 8, and that's a regulatory function. There is reason why there is apprehension to disclose certain things for regulatory agencies. That's something that you need to navigate carefully with your counsel. Hire Erin. But let's talk about how the intelligence community and the investigative community interacts when the breach happens and what their roles are. For the FBI's role in a breach or in any cyber investigation is attribution. It's investigating who is behind the attack, how did it happen, are there IOCs and DMs that can be set up for patterns to help us, when I say us, the greater intelligence community, help other companies, right, and protect national security, protect critical infrastructure. That's an important distinction between what CISA's role is. CISA's role is remediation, hardening networks, right? So CISA is before an attack and CISA is much after attack, but we both react to breaches and responses together. When you combine those two federal agencies with incident response vendors, either whether it's internal or companies like yours and Mandy and some others, that's the perfect combination of a response to a breach where you're sitting, and again, I had some questions about this after in the hallway. When we're sitting in a breach and everybody's stuffed in a conference room and we're taking all the power in the building because we're doing forensics, the ultimate people in that party are obviously the CISO, the corporate counsel, or if it's outside counsel, right? Obviously all the IT folks that are internal, the response team from the FBI, and then CISA's team dealing with remediation afterwards. And then sometimes if there's a nation state actor involved, we have another intelligence agency that the FBI is interacting with aside. NSA most notably, but that could be CIA, sometimes it can be DOD. So that's kind of the big takeaway from this morning is just understanding what the roles are. And then lastly, another big takeaway was apprehensions from CISOs, from corporate counsels on sharing information with intelligence organizations, law enforcement agencies. And there is a number of protections in place that protects that information, especially when you're dealing with IOCs or defense measures, that type of data. The CISA Act of 2015 has certain protections for that data, right? We're also protected from disclosing that from the Freedom of Information Act. I won't just describe that any further because that's Erin's line of work. So there's a number of protections that help the exchange of information. And just like you and I were talking about before we got on here, it's sometimes a company will look at it as, hey, does it really matter who's behind this, right? I need to contain it, and I need to evict this particular, whatever it is, whether it's malware or whatever. Now, what I would say to you, and what we said in the back room, is the larger picture is what the Bureau and the intelligence community is putting together. It may not necessarily matter to your CISO, who's micro-focused on a particular part of the breach, whereas we're gathering all this data, we have it in a protected database, we're sharing it with intelligence agencies to build out patterns to hopefully help the next company or even the same company get breached again.
Well, and I think that speaks really nicely to the complexity of these events. And it's not one lens or one aperture that's on the event, but it's a multitude. So as a investigative team like I run, we're hired predominantly by counsel, so the blanket of privilege applies, so that we can run the investigation. We're the ones with the fingers on the keyboards. Now, we may liaise with the FBI, it might be the Secret Service, it might be AFP, ASD, NCA, so we have to work across that same multitude. And then you add in additional complexity from insurance, providers, because they may want to put their response team on the ground, or they may want their fingers in the pie. And then in addition, these organizations who have highly regulated data, they may have to report. They may have a legal obligation or a regulatory obligation. And so, Erin, to your point about not waiting until you have an incident to understand who are you going to call, what are you going to tell them, what order are you going to call them in, I think is super important. And so maybe touch on that, because I love tabletop exercises. Like as an old Army officer, we used to run simulations, not until we could get it right, but until we couldn't get it wrong. And so what's your advice on that?
Yeah, so tabletops are very valuable. It's really helpful, quite honestly. Even absent a massive tabletop where people are playing the different rules, even just kind of walking through scenarios, people sitting at a table, just taking 2 hours even to just walk through, okay, if this happens, who are you going to call? Who do you talk to next? Do you know the right people? That in and of itself can be really valuable. And we were talking, one of the things from this morning was, reach out to somebody at one of your local field offices. There are 55 field offices across the U.S. Reach out to somebody. You can reach out to us. We'll help connect you to somebody, because you need one endpoint, and that person can help get you wherever you need to be, whether that's within the FBI, whether that's within a different agency. They can help get you there. And some of the other resources that are out there for folks are InfraGard, and the DSAC. So InfraGard is for individuals, DSAC is for companies, but those are two great entities that exist around the country and are ways to get connections with your local field office. One of the things we haven't touched on yet here too is, like Shawn was saying, in terms of having the pieces to build the bigger picture, reporting it. So how do you report it? And that's a question we get quite often, and I've gotten several times just in the last few months. Well, I've had this happen, now what do I do? So IC3.gov, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, was set up by the FBI specifically to allow for that function of kind of collecting all of the dots so that they can figure out what all is going on. It might be a run-of-the-mill ransomware attack, which obviously when you're the victim doesn't feel run-of-the-mill, but that will help the FBI and help the intelligence community to build that bigger picture of what's going on.
And Shawn, what would you say, because when we speak to clients, right, and we talk about these preparatory steps that they can and should be taking, I frequently hear feedback, that goes something like this: I don't have the time for that, or I don't see the importance in doing that. We'll just figure it out when it happens. Like, what would you say to a CISO or a CEO that says, I don't have the time to practice and think about it, I'll deal with it when it happens?
Yeah, well, being that I ran the cyber action team for the FBI cyber division for a couple of years, and all the different times that we have deployed. If I had $1 for every time I sat with or my team sat with a CISO and he said, or she said, hey, I wish I had taken the time. Wish I could have made the time because I had no idea of the associated cost to the company. Now, sometimes that's just man hours, sometimes that's literally intellectual property.
Or
right?
Reputation.
A reputation.
Lost opportunity costs.
Exactly. Or debating about paying millions of dollars in ransom. Don't do that. But talk to counsel and talk to your law enforcement officials. But if every CISO and that's been breached could write a book, this always would be the first paragraph. Yeah. Right? I wish I convinced my C-suite to invest more money in cybersecurity.
That's a great quote. The one I've heard throughout my career is, I never thought it would happen to me. Right? It was kind of tongue-in-cheek, my analogy this morning about the sheep, right? And the sheep saying, well, we don't need the sheepdogs, not realizing that the sheepdog is the thing that sits between them and the wolves. And thinking, I thought it would always happen to someone else. Bad things happen to other people. It's this externalization of bad and internalization of good, which is a pretty standard cognitive bias. But that's not the case, right? Bad things happen to good people all the time, and to corporations that are doing good things and trying to, just keep the lights on and feed their kids and, send their families to college and things like that. So I guess from either of your perspectives, that was, one of the other takeaways we had from this morning is any organization of any type, of any size, is a target. Mm-hmm. I mean, Erin, what are your thoughts on that concept of, regardless of the size and regardless of what you do as a core competency, you 100% are a target?
Yeah, so every single company has data. So whether it's data about your own employees, whether it's data about your customers, every company's got data, and every company is connected to the internet in some way. So you are a target, because whether it's criminals, whether it's nation-state actors, no matter who it is, the guy sitting in the basement or a teenager playing around, you are an attractive target to them. They can do something, get your data, and monetize it in some way. So you need to take steps and precautions ahead of time.
What do you think about that, Shawn?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say there is, regardless of the size of a company, what it particularly does, and Erin is right on point. Like, data is data. Data is vulnerability. Data has some type of value associated to it. But I can say on the national security side of things, ransomware all the way to nation-state actors, some of the companies that own some of the most exquisite intellectual property are very, very small companies. Mm-hmm. And intellectual property to an adversary means different things. Right? We think of the obvious things that are patented, things that are for R&D and research for DoD. But there are many other small things out there that the adversaries have their eye on, whether it's some small little polymer equation, whether it's one particular strand of code that's unique. Right? These guys are persistent, they're super sophisticated, and especially now in the day and age where it was a time where it was mostly hardware focused, and then on the software, just patch, mm-hmm. Right? But now the patches are compromised, mm-hmm. Right? Now the patches have exploits in it, and those exploits are getting more and more sophisticated. Yeah. So it's becoming easier. The more sophisticated technology gets, actually, the easier it is.
It increases the attack surface.
Exactly.
Well, and I would also say, like, for the real estate context, since we're sitting here at Realcomm, like, it is a risk to all of you because you've got tenants, you've got buildings, you've got people in your space. So what gets attention better or more easily than like an entire building going dark or an entire building that's at 100 degrees? So those are some places and some things where a bad actor can get attention really quickly that you might not even have been thinking about in terms of where you're vulnerable and where you could get hurt.
Exactly, and the attack surface within a building extends beyond what we would consider standard IT infrastructure. You have computer systems that control HVAC, they control elevators, escalators, fire suppression, door locks, right? Anything within that building that's computerized can be leveraged in a kinetic attack. And it's, it's been interesting to hear all the different technologies that have been part of the conference. And the one thing I haven't heard is the bad guys get a vote, right? And that's, I think, something, if from my perspective, that I would love to see become more part of the discussion is we have all these great technologies and we want to do all these great things with our buildings. That's fantastic. I love that. But the bad guys get a vote too. And what are we going to do not only to keep them out, but how do we respond when they're in and kick them out? And what security controls and countermeasures and detection capabilities do we need to have to make sure that vision of a futuristic building, like we talked about, today in the CIO forum, makes it, and it's not leveraged, in a kinetic attack.
Agreed. So an old colleague of mine in the intelligence community gave a great talk one day in a classified setting, and I'll just paraphrase it. You're walking in a warehouse, you're not connected, you think everything is safe, but you have a vending machine over there in the corner and it's plugged in and it has a network portal. I'm already in your network, right? And you can see the room like, what? That's a third-party vendor. It doesn't connect to our network. Well, it can, and it will, if you have the right sophisticated adversary. And on the real estate side in particular, what comes to mind for me when I'm thinking of, well, how, other than the structure itself, the commercial real estate structure itself, it's third-party vulnerabilities, right? There was, I won't go into details, but there was one significant breach that I dealt with, which was a third-party closing company for a large commercial company, right? And it was a PII compromise, right? But that PII is being stored in the PRC's hitting it with quantum and, right, for who knows what, right? It's maybe not immediate to everybody that's in that company or in that building, but somebody's PII in there may be of interest once it hits quantum back in Beijing.
For sure. So I know we just have a few minutes left here. So why don't we start again, ladies first. And what is one takeaway that if everyone who's listening to this only walks away with one thing, what is that one thing that you want them to remember?
So I would say the one thing would be prepare ahead of time. So that sort of encompasses a lot, but prepare ahead of time, know what you got, where it is, and again, know who to call when something bad happens, because unfortunately, again, you're probably going to get hit by something at some point.
My big takeaway is it takes a village, right? And leave pride aside in terms of the force multiplier of federal agencies, law enforcement, the intelligence community, collaborating with other CISOs on breaches and sharing information, right? It may seem like you're showing that maybe you didn't do a good job, but you're doing an even better job if you're sharing experiences. It makes you better at what you do, makes you harden your networks, right? So again, it takes a village, and if it's a pride thing, or another thing that I get from CISOs all the time is they don't want red teams. They don't want outside red teams, right? Because they don't want a sophisticated actor getting into their network. Well, that's the first thing that you should want, right? Because you're looking at it just on your own lens constantly. Have somebody else come in and look at that. And then if you're vulnerable, thank God it was the red team.
Yeah.
And not a ransomware actor.
The bad guy only has to be right once.
Exactly.
You have to be right 100% of the time.
Right, and I'd be interested in both of your perspectives on this as well. But my key takeaway from today and from my experience is I've never one time met a CISO or a CEO who was pleased with the fact that they underinvested in cybersecurity. Right? They never thought, dang it, that was a really good choice that I made to not invest in cybersecurity. Erin, what do you think about that in closing?
Yeah, it's one of those things that in a place of finite resources, it's one of those places that it actually pays dividends to spend the money here.
Yeah, and again, it only takes one.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, regardless of where you've been listening from. We appreciate you spending your time with us this afternoon or this evening, and just wish you have a great day.
Thank you.